Hey guys, it's Miss Patrick, and we are on day 7 of the Hero Two Doors Down. And we don't have very much left, as you can see. So I'm going to read for 15 to 20 minutes today and see how far we get. Mom lifted her right hand and settled it on top of mine. I knew you'd understand, Stephen. You have the heart of a healer. What does that mean? I asked. It means that you care about others. That's a good way to be, Mom said, planting a kiss on my cheek. I got up from my chair and walked over to the counter where my list lay, untouched, to do a good deed. I'd have to give up something expensive from my list. I picked it up and crossed out the Diesel Road Roller, a toy I'd seen advertised in the Brooklyn Eagle. I knew that it was my most expensive gift. Thank you, Steve, Mom said as she smiled down at me. I have one more request. What's that? I asked. We'd like to include a letter from you to the children along with the check. What would I say? Think about what you'd like to say if you had a friend who lived in Israel and was surrounded by war. Mom said, handing me a pad of paper, write what's in your heart. To who? You could start, dear friend, Mom suggested. I sat back down and tried to imagine the real sounds of gunfire and bombs going off around me. My hands trembled as I began to write. Dear friend, my name is Stephen Satlow. I live in Brooklyn, New York, where there is no war. My family and I want to help, but we can't stop the bombing. We're sending you money so you can eat and blankets so you won't be cold. We will pray that peace will come soon and you can live where it is safe. You are so brave. I hope we meet someday. Sincerely, Steve. Chapter 9. By early Monday morning, the snowstorm had finally slowed, leaving the usual bustling city stilled under mountains of white powder. Only a few cars, taxis, and buses braved the elements to crawl up newly plowed streets narrowed by rows of trapped cars. Despite the snowstorm, school was not closed. From my bedroom window, I could see kids bursting out of apartment buildings and low-rise brick houses, intent on adventures as they walked to school. Once class let out, the real fun began. Dressed in layers of flannel and wool, I met Sina outside my house. We set out dragging our sleds to a patch of open, hilly property. Be careful, my mother yelled down to us from the top, landing on our front stoop. The roads are barely plowed. Cars will be slipping and sliding with drivers who think they're in control but aren't. We'll be fine, Mom, I yelled back. Keep your eyes alert to icy patches. Sina and I proceeded up Tilden Avenue past our school and onward. For a while, we pretended not to be cold. Instead, I kept telling myself that we were on an adventure. I can barely feel my fingertips, Sina complained. We were just 2 blocks from my house. Put your free hand inside your coat pocket, I suggested. Can't, she said. How come? Because I need both hands to pull this sled, Sina told me. It's heavy, Steve. I felt sorry for Sina. She was about my height but thinner. I wasn't big enough to pull 2 sleds. 3 more blocks, Sina. Surely you can make that. I peeked over at her, hoping she'd rally to the challenge. Didn't say I changed my mind, she muttered. Finally, we reached our destination. It was a neighborhood winter wonderland. The hills were packed with kids sledding, laughter and screams piercing the snowy calm. Snowballs were being hurled from every direction. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Sina smiling and thought she was up to something. I dropped my sled and turned away from her, looking for a good spot to sled. A ball of wet, cold snow splattered against my jacket. I felt the sting against my left shoulder and turned back to Sina. Grabbing a wad of snow, I hurled it at her. Sina stood straight in defiance, daring me to hit her again. Game on, we screamed at the same time. We battled, laughing so hard we were weak from struggle. After a good 20 rounds, I quit. With soggy woolen mitts and frozen fingers, I surrendered. Sina and I climbed up the less crowded side of the hill, hopped on our sleds, and sped down, screaming as if wolves were chasing us. This uphill-downhill play continued until we could no longer feel our fingers or toes. I made it back home in time to see Jackie shoveling his front steps. I stopped to chat. Hey, Steve, where have you been? Sledding, I told him. At the 47th Street Park? No, my friend Sina and I went to an area with lots of hills. The place was packed with kids, I explained. We had so much fun. I've never gone sledding, Jackie mused. It must be fun. I'll put that on my list for Jackie and me to do when he's older. Sure is cold today, I said, shivering. In Southern California, where I grew up, it didn't get this cold. Really? I responded in surprise. What happened in winters then? Jackie chuckled. Guess California doesn't have much of a winter. Not like the East Coast, anyway. It's mostly warm year round. If the temperature drops down to the 50s or 60s, we wear a light jacket. About this time of year, I'd be on the golf course, not shoveling snow, but since I plan to play baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers a long time, I better get used to this cold weather. Jackie finished clearing the last 2 steps. Want to come in and have some hot chocolate? I better get home now, I told him. Do you have family coming over this weekend? A bunch. That'll be nice. We don't have much family here. Maybe you can come by on Thursday. We'll be decorating for the holiday and it'll be more fun for Jackie if you're there. Would you like that? Would I? Great, but get your parents' permission. Come over around 1. We'll send you back home by 3. On Thursday, I carried my L-17 model plane with me to the Robinsons. Rachel opened the door and wrapped her arms around me. Come on in quickly and warm up. Jack and Jackie Jr. are in the living room decorating our tree. I made this plane, I said, holding it up so Rachel could get a good view. Wow, she said, that is incredible. It is a replica of a plane used during World War II? Sure is, I replied. How'd you know? Oh, I worked on warplanes as a riveter. What's a riveter? I asked. It was a name given to women who worked in American factories during World War II, Rachel explained. A rivet is a metal pin. They were hammered into the warplanes to hold pieces of the plane together. It was my job to stand inside the plane while the metal bolts were hammered from the outside. Through holes on the inside, I'd yell to that person outside the plane to let them know that the bolt was coming through the hole. The war was far away and women couldn't fight. We wanted to help out, and it sure felt good when we did. That is so cool, I said. How's your mother, Steve? She's getting ready for our big family dinner Sunday, I replied. I'll bet she is, Rachel said. Go on into the living room and see if you can help my husband between the lights and little Jackie. He's got his hands full. I'm headed into the kitchen to make a snack. Are you hungry? Not really, I replied. How about some hot chocolate? Yes, please. When I walked into the living room, my mouth dropped open. Jackie was standing on a ladder next to a giant tree. I'd never, ever seen a tree inside anyone's house. Evie, Jackie Jr. screamed when he saw me. I lifted my little friend into the air, swung him around, and set him back on the floor. He was just beginning to say words we could understand. Hi, Jackie, I called up. Glad you made it, Steve. I moved in closer to the evergreen tree. It smelled like the woods and nearly touched the ceiling. Jackie was stringing colored lights through its branches. He looked down and smiled. You're just in time to help me string these lights around the tree. I looked up and down the huge tree. I can't reach that high, I squeaked out. Jackie chuckled. Me either. That's why I have this ladder. You can still help. I'll wrap the lights around the top. You can string them around the bottom. Got it? I said, happy to have a part in making the tree sparkle. Together we wound the lights from top to bottom. Then we settled around the coffee table to drink hot chocolate and admire the tree. It's so big and pretty, I marveled. Had to get the biggest one on the lot, right, son? Jackie said proudly. Is your tree up yet, Steve? Oh, we don't have one. Steve, Rachel said. I have a special project for you and little Jackie that involves colored paper, scissors, and paste. Are you two ready to make something pretty to put on the tree? Jackie Jr. and I clapped our hands and raced to the kitchen, while Jackie carefully placed colorful bulbs on the branches of the tree. An hour later, we were laughing and stringing a paper wreath around the tree. When the tree was decorated, Rachel plugged in the lights, and Jackie Jr. and I screamed with joy. It was the most beautiful tree I'd ever seen. Chapter 10. Sina sledded past me and yelled, "Look out!" I used my mittened hands to increase my speed and catch up to her. We crashed into each other and toppled off our sleds, laughing and rolling in the tamped down snow. It was the next day, and we were still making the most of the huge snowfall. That was amazing, Sina screamed as we righted ourselves in the snow. Sure was, but I've got to go home, I said. Yeah, me too. It'll be dark soon. When I got home, my parents were anxiously waiting for me. Stephen, Mom called out as I stepped onto the front hallway. Yes, Mom, I answered as I began slipping out of my wet coat, hat, boots, and gloves. Stephen, come in here immediately, my father barked. Coming, I yelled back, tripping over my wet clothes as I hustled to the living room. Had I stayed at the park too long? Missed a doctor's appointment? I was searching my brain, trying to come up with a reason for my dad's bad mood. Am I in trouble? I asked from the doorway. Did you ask Jackie Robinson for a Christmas tree? Dad demanded. I repeated his question over in my mind. A Christmas tree? No, I was over at the Robinsons helping them decorate a tree, and Jackie asked if our tree was up. I told him no, I replied. Then I spotted the evergreen tree leaning up against the wall. It wasn't quite as tall as the Robinsons, but it sure was a beauty. Jeepers, I yelled. Did Jackie buy that tree for me? Are you sure you didn't say you wanted a tree, Stephen? Dad asked again. No, I repeated, confused by all the fuss over a tree. I was already thinking of ways to decorate it. Steve, this is not a joke. That pointed towards this beautiful evergreen is a Christmas tree. Did you ask Jackie to get one for you? No, I did not, I stated clearly. I just told him that we didn't have one. Did you also tell him that we're Jewish and don't celebrate Christmas? No one mentioned Christmas, I said. We just decorated a tree like this one. Stephen, come sit down next to me, Mom gestured towards the couch. I slid in beside her. Do you realize that today is Christmas Eve and tomorrow is Christmas? No, I said. None of my friends talked about Christmas. They only talked about Hanukkah. Honest, Ma, I didn't know that when you bring a tree like that into a house, it's called a Christmas tree. I've never ever seen a big tree inside someone's house until yesterday, and boy, was it pretty. You mean at the Robinsons' house, right, Steve? Right, I replied. We covered it with lights and shiny colored bulbs. Rachel even helped little Jackie and me make decorations out of colored paper. I had so much fun. No one said anything about Christmas. I just thought it was pretty, I said, fighting back tears. Did I do something wrong? Mom wrapped her arms around me. Absolutely not, son. It's just a misunderstanding, that's all. I better call Rachel and explain. Dad, can I keep the tree? No, Steve, it wouldn't be right, Dad replied. This is a Christmas tree. It's a symbol of a Christian holiday. Like Hanukkah, Christmas is part religious holiday and part tradition. It is also a time when families gather around symbols like the Christmas tree and exchange gifts. The problem is that Jews and Christians have different beliefs and separate holidays. Your mother and I respect those differences. We appreciate that the Robinsons shared part of their religious experience with you. They may not have understood Jewish tradition and the fact that we don't celebrate Christmas. That's why it's best if your mother speaks with Rachel so there won't be any further misunderstanding. Won't it hurt their feelings, I asked. No more than it would hurt your grandparents to come into our home and see a Christmas tree, Dad explained. What would Bubby say, I pressed. Dad chuckled. What will your mother say, Sarah? She'd say, oh, they, and maybe even faint, Mom teased. Right, so get rid of it before we upset our Hanukkah dinner, Dad said. We can't do that, I protested. We most certainly can, my father retorted. I was torn over what was right and wrong. The tree was a gift from Jackie Robinson to me. That made it super special, like when he gave me the practice mitt, but I understood my father's concerns. Still, it was a gift given out of friendship. I didn't want anything to spoil my relationship with Jackie. Mom, please don't call Rachel yet, I pleaded. I can't just give the tree back to Jackie. There has to be a way for me to keep it. There just has to be. Do you understand why your father and I are concerned, Mom asked. Sort of, I replied. I get that it's not like a tree in the park. I get that it means something to families who believe in Christmas, like our menorah means to us. But it doesn't have to mean Christmas to us, does it? My father didn't respond. He stood tall and firm on the other side of the room while Mom and I talked quietly. Dad, I moaned, looking over at him. It's a gift. Archie, Steve has a point, Mom said, and then hesitated. We could simply tell my parents the truth, that Steve has a special friendship with our neighbors and they gave him the tree. Absolutely not, Dad boomed. But Dad, I pleaded. Sarah, take care of this, Dad demanded. The doorbell rang just when Dad seemed to make his final judgment. He left the room to answer the door without saying another word. A few minutes later, he stepped back into the living room with the Robinsons. My mouth flew open. Oh no, I thought, now Dad will spoil everything. I avoided looking directly at Jackie. Hi, Steve, Jackie said, patting my head and smiling down at me. Do you like your tree? My head bobbed up and down, but I didn't speak. Here, Rachel and I brought over lights and ornaments, Jackie said as he handed me a box marked fragile and a wooden angel. This angel goes on the very top of the tree. Gee, thanks, I said, looking from Jackie to my dad, fearful of the next words between the two. I hope you don't mind, Archie. If you could have seen Steve's face yesterday when he saw our tree. Well, when Steve said he didn't have one, I just thought it would be a nice thing to share. We think so highly of your boy, Archie. He's become part of our family. Jackie talked fast and meant well. I appreciate the sentiment, Dad finally said. Sarah, I hope we didn't overstep our boundaries. I told Jackie that you might be buying your tree later today, Rachel said. Rachel, forgive us. You've been so generous with our son. He loves spending time with you, and we appreciate your friendship, Mom replied. I was so shocked by the gesture that I didn't respond appropriately when Jackie showed up with this lovely tree. The problem is that we're Jewish, and we do not celebrate Christmas. Oh my, Rachel whispered, looking from my mom to Jackie. I'm so sorry, Jackie apologized. Rachel, Jack, it's okay, my mother insisted. We know you meant well. You see, until you moved into the neighborhood, Steve had very limited exposure to families from other faiths. Only Jewish families lived in this neighborhood. His school friends are all Jewish. When you invited Steve to come over, I had no idea he'd be helping you decorate your Christmas tree, or I would have prepared him. This weekend we'll begin our Hanukkah celebration. It's a Jewish holiday, and this year it just happens to fall a day after Christmas. I looked from my mother to the Robinsons, wondering how this news would affect me. I glanced over at my father and tried to read his expression, but all the adults were focused on Mom. I realized that she was key to how both families were working through this uncomfortable moment. It also dawned on me that keeping my friendship with the Robinsons was far more important than keeping a tree. Jack and I are so embarrassed, Rachel offered again. Our sincere apologies, Jackie added. It didn't even occur to me that you didn't celebrate Christmas. You see, we're very much like Steve. Until we moved to Tilden Avenue, Rachel and I had very little interaction with Jewish families. I'm ashamed to admit that until now, we didn't know much about your faith either. I was bursting to say something, but what should I say? I didn't want to blow it, and I knew if I said the wrong thing, I'd be in big trouble. I opened my mouth to speak, but a giggle escaped. Gee, Dad, I began, trying to hold my laughter at bay. It's kind of funny. I glanced over at Mom. Her face was red as she too found the situation amusing. Mom and I started to giggle at the same time. Before we knew it, even Dad and Jackie were laughing. When we all settled back down, I popped the big question. Dad, you taught me to accept a gift in the spirit that is given, right? I asked. That's right, son, my father admitted. Then can I keep the tree? Jackie jumped in. It's all right, Steve. We made a mistake. I'll take the tree home with us. But Dad silenced Jackie with a wave of his hands. We turned our attention to my father. We've all learned an important lesson here today, Dad began. I realize now that I've been inflexible. Sunday night is our first night of Hanukkah. Our extended family will gather here for prayers, the lighting of the menorah, and a special meal. Later, the children will play games. This year, we've decided to dedicate the first day of Hanukkah to peace. I will lead the prayer, and others can share their perspectives. It would be wonderful if you, Rachel, and little Jackie could join us. We'd love to, Jackie replied. That's great, Dad said as he and Jackie shook hands and Rachel and Mom hugged. Steve, Dad said, turning to me, you may keep the tree. Maybe the Robinsons can help us decorate it. You were right. This tree is a gift of friendship, and we will accept it as such. We've been blessed to share this year with the Robinsons. The tree solidifies that blessing. This year, this Jewish family will have both a Christmas tree and a menorah. Sunday afternoon, we waited for the Robinsons to arrive before saying our prayers and lighting the menorah. When Jackie walked in, my booby was the first to greet him. Mr. Robinson, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Thank you for being so generous of your time with our Stevie, she said. I trailed behind my grandmother and the Robinsons so they were introduced to my extended family. I kept hoping there would be no complaints about the Christmas tree. When Booby finished introduction, she pulled Jackie aside and whispered something that made him smile. Knowing my Booby, it figured it had something to do with the Christmas tree. Dad and Mom came out of the kitchen with the last of the platters of food and saw Booby talking with Jackie. They put the platters down on the long dining room table and went over to welcome the Robinsons. And that's all I have today. Tune in tomorrow for some more. Bye, guys.